So you guys know, I've been talking about propaganda, all right? More specifically, I've been talking about space propaganda, right? It seems to me that this idea of space, the idea of planets that we can travel to, that the luminaries in the sky or terra firma, where we can reach if we only could get there and explore our, send explorers out there. This idea that space exploration is possible seems to have been propagandized through Hollywood and mass media since the very beginning. And I told you guys, we're going to be talking about this Hollywood propaganda, and specifically with this one, space propaganda. And so today we're going to review what I think is a propaganda classic. The 1902 French movie called A Trip to the Moon. Now, some of you guys may know of this movie. It's pretty iconic at this point, but I know there's a lot amongst my audience who probably has never seen this. I've only recently watched it all the way through, and I think it's chocked full of interesting content. It seems to be encoded in many ways. So let's do it. Let me show you guys what I'm talking about. Let me bring it up here. La Voyage dans la Lune. Alex Tilburg. Our man in France. He could translate it, but I'll translate it. Means a trip to the moon, guys. All right. So, A Trip to the Moon. It's in 1902. Think about that. That's 121 years ago. It's a French science fiction adventure film directed by Georges Méliès. It's considered the first sci-fi movie ever made. It was in black and white and silent. Now it's got music and stuff, but there's no words. Again, it's black and white, but this is going to be a colorized version because I think it looks nice. Alex Tilburg is confirming, yes, it means a trip to the moon. Thank you, Alex. Interestingly enough, it was the first sci-fi movie ever produced. It's like 18 minutes, 17, 18 minutes long. It's not that long. But it begs the question, if film is a new technology, movies were brand new at this time. Again, it was the first sci-fi movie ever made. Begs the question, why was the first sci-fi movie ever made about a trip to the moon? Let's really think about it, guys. Think about the level of technology in 1902. Think about the Wright brothers, when the first flight was. Think about the level of technology in 1902. All right? I want you to think about these things as we watch this. Apparently, the movie was based off a Jules Verne novel. It was an 1865 novel called Far From Earth to the Moon, and its 1870 sequel, Around the Moon. So now we just up the ante. Not only are they giving us the first sci-fi movie ever made of 1902 called A Trip to the Moon, but it's based on an earlier novel from 1865 called From Earth to the Moon. So in 1865, Jules Verne, a science fiction writer, was writing about humans going to the moon. But it begs the question, why was anyone in 1865, why would anybody be assuming that you can go to the moon? And even more interesting, how did that assumption translate into a reality about 100 years later in the late 1960s when we apparently actually went to the moon? All right. I want you guys to think of that. We learned from our good friend Neil deGrasse Tyson that we didn't even confirm Earth was a planet until we went to the moon in the late 60s and early 70s, when we were finally able to see Earth from a distance and say, yes, indeed, it's a globular planet, just like all the quote unquote other planets. But how in 1865 did Jules Verne know about the technology that could bring us to the moon? How did he know what space would be? How did he even know the moon is a place you can go to? I'm just saying. Because Z asked these questions. I'm just like a guy who asks questions. Let's get into it, guys. By the way, the aesthetic of this movie is it's really to me it's beautiful. I like the way it looks. It's campy. It's goofy. Let's get into it. I like the music too. All right, so notice we start off. Can you guys see this? Yeah, you can see it. I want you to see where we start off here. So these are a bunch of astronomers. These are the intelligentsia of the time. I want you to look at the setting. Notice where they are. A group of academic, it's academia. Notice the setting. First thing you'll notice is the two pillars. Well, what do we know about the two pillars? Joaquin, Boaz. These pillars represent Freemasonry. It's Masonic. Look at the globes. Look at the telescopes. All right. Look at the architecture in the room they're in. This is all reminiscent of the Masons. Look at their look what they're wearing. Look at the robes. Look at the hats. Exactly, the twin pillars. Look at the regalia. To me, this looks very Jesuit. All right. What do we know about the Jesuits? They basically had a handle on academia for at least the last 500 years, maybe more. So right away, they're presenting us with Masonic Jesuit imagery, wizard-like. Much of the knowledge incorporated into the Jesuit order comes from mystery school, occulted knowledge, Hermeticism, knowledge found in the Kabbalium. They had access through their secret societies to this knowledge. It's all being represented here. Look here, above these three ladies, above their heads, look at the compass. That's the Masonic compass. You see it? I just noticed it right now, next to the chalkboard. I'm running my arrow over it. That's the Masonic compass right over their head. The imagery matters here. And then look in the chalkboard. What do you see? You see a globe Earth, and then you have the moon out here. You're seeing the heliocentric / solar system model that shows that there's a globular Earth with a moon as a satellite. Okay? Let's continue. All right, now we have the entrance of it's basically a comedy troupe. What you'll notice right away is this movie's satirical. It's basically an early science fiction comedy. They're satirizing what a trip to the moon would be as they enter. Here comes the servants or the maidens. They ceremoniously hand them each a telescope, which obviously symbolizes that they're astronomers. Again, they're the intelligentsia. They're part of the elite. They're being catered to, served. They're being treated with venerance. Oh, Dick, a lot of these chicks have nice tails, wagging their tails around. Let's continue. All right. Now here enters, right here where you see my arrow, let's call him the chairman, the president of the organization. He's going to enter. And they're all greeting him. I want you to notice on the far right here, sitting by himself, elevated on a chair, again where my cursor is, you'll see him, he's set apart. Now he's going to represent something. He's not with the audience. He seems to be separated, set apart for some reason, but he's also elevated. He's sitting on a dais by himself, which means he has some status. But notice his seat is not as high as the president who's about to take his seat. For whatever reason, the telescopes turned into chairs. I don't know why they would do that. Like, what's the significance of that? And then they take their seat. All right. So the chairman, the president. Notice how goofy they have him, clown-like almost. He's in costume. He's got the overly exaggerated facial hair, and the same things with his 6 or the 5 other guys in the front row. They all have the masks on, like clowns. And the president's explaining to them, "We're going to go to the moon, guys." Oh, he's drawing out his rocket ship. Or basically, it's the propulsion cannon. And we're going to blast him off to the moon! Yay! But the one guy, look how he jumped up. The lone dissenter. Once he hears the plan, he's outraged. He jumps out of his seat. And he's the lone dissenter. And he's saying, "Are you fucking crazy? You can't go to the moon." The moon's not a place you can go to. This is absurd. I object. But he's overruled. Because at this point, they're engaged in groupthink. They're caught up in the excitement and the pageantry of such an audacious, an audacious idea that we can go to the moon. He jumps up and he's protesting. But what do? They shout him down. They grab him. They put hands on him. They throw things at him. Get away! Nobody wants to hear you. And they get rid of him. Sit down. We're going to the moon, dummy. You sit your ass down. We're going to the moon, damn it. We don't care about logistics. We don't care about practicality. We're going. Yeah, they Gus Grissomed him. He got Gus Grissomed. Look how disappointed he is. He knows it's bullshit, but he knows there's nothing he can do about it. And here come the lovely ladies. So they're getting them out of their wizard costumes, because make no mistake about it, guys. These are wizards. This is what I'm telling you about so-called science. The imagery here is of magicians. Magic. Where's the science? Where's the experiments? Nope. It's a bunch of pseudo-intellectuals standing around, a bunch of guys in a room talking a bunch of theoretical nonsense, thinking that their theory could translate into demonstrable reality. They're lampooning the so-called science community. You know how Z's always telling you about hashtag science? About theoretical science and theoretical physics? About pseudoscience? About the religion of scientism? You're seeing it depicted here in 1902 in one of the first films ever made in satire. They're not scientists. They're wizards. And they're clowns. So now they're changing from their wizard costumes into their travel attire. All right. So now we have the construction of the capsule. I want you to notice the shape of it. Notice it's, you see the Smiths here. So it's iron, steel, etc. But now you see the construction of it. But here we are again in 1902. We're depicting what a space capsule would be. It looks very similar to what they presented to us with the Apollo missions. It looks very similar to what we see now with SpaceX and the Dragon capsule that is apparently transporting astronauts to low Earth orbit, to the International Space Station. Well, here they're depicting it now, but just the way they would do it in 1902. Here's these astronomers who are going to be the astronauts, astronomers, astronauts. They're overseeing the construction here. They're inspecting it. This is what's going to bring us to the moon. Science. The wizards have to greet the plebes, again, reminiscent of NASA. The Apollo missions. How many people worked on the Apollo missions? How many people will you run into, even today? My grandpa worked for a company that was contracted for NASA. My grandpa made a piece of equipment that was part of the Apollo missions. How dare you, Z, say we never went to the moon? My uncle, so-and-so, worked for an engineering firm, and they designed one of the pieces for the air conditioning components for the Apollo missions. How dare you, Z? Well, it's the same here. You have all these artisans working on the capsule. They're part of the mission. So here comes the grand wizards, the so-called astronomers. They're here to greet them. They want to make them feel involved. This is about all of us. This is a human endeavor. We're going to the moon, everybody. Then for whatever reason, one of them falls into the barrel. I don't know if that's symbolic or they're just trying to show that they're clowns. This is clownish in nature. All right. So now they're overseeing this landscape. And what you see is a bunch of factory chimneys, industrial chimneys. This is basically a mill. You see smelting in the background. You see metallurgy. And what they're doing is they're creating a cast of the barrel. And now you see the barrel, the entrance. So they're indicating the propulsion technology, the mechanism that you would use to relay this to an audience in 1902. And you see the capsule, the space capsule, which basically here could be looked at as like a shell, like a projectile shell. And here's our astronauts. Again, notice how they're dressed like clowns. This is satirical. Notice the pageantry. You see the women, the color guard, dressed in which 1902. Look how short her shorts are. Just realize that this is the 1902 version of, like, a sexy lady, right? So as they're entering their space capsule and they're surrounded by pageantry, regalia, right? It's theatrical. It's a show. Notice, we're not showing engineers. We're not showing designers, mathematicians. No, we're being presented with wizards We're being presented with theatrics. They're telling us that the trip to the moon is about trickery. It's about propaganda and pageantry. And then the women load the capsule. And again, more pageantry. I'm not sure the significance of having the women loaded in, but there has to be some symbolism there. All right, now the capsule's loaded up. Interestingly enough, a military man comes out and gives the signal. This is the first time we're seeing any presence of a governmental agent. All right, but for whatever reason, they're depicting a soldier in uniform. He's the one that gives the signal to launch the capsule. And boom, the capsule's launched. And here we are, heading to the moon. And here's the iconic right here. As we approach the moon, all right, let me freeze it on here. Look at the imagery here, okay, guys? You have the man on the moon face depicted, and then the capsule gets lodged in its eye, which is violent. Notice it's depicting the moon as as personified and anthropomorphized. It's depicting the moon as sentient, as living. And now we have violated it. We've assaulted this sentient, living luminary. We've sent a projectile now that is just gone right into the eye of the moon. And don't let the one eye symbolism be missed on you here. There's significance that it crashed and penetrated through the eye. Make no mistake about it. And here we are on the moon, moonscape. There we go, our first astronaut on the moon. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. In 1902. Yay, we're on the moon. I guess in 1902 there's no need for a spacesuit. And there we have Earthrise. I gotta say, this depiction of Earthrise is it's not much worse than like the depictions they give us now of fake CGI space. This is comparable. Earth from the moon. It is indeed a planet and a globe. They're tired from their long journey to the moon. So it's time to sleep. And here come the luminaries as a comet. Now we're greeted by, what is that? Seven stars. uh, depicted as the Big Dipper. You can see the Big Dipper obviously depicted there. Ursa Major. Why they chose the Big Dipper, I can only speculate. Again, notice the faces within each star. They're personifying the luminaries as sentient and female. And they seem to be looking down upon them like, what are you guys doing here? You're not supposed to be here. And then you see the stars transition into more luminaries. Notice the imagery. First on the right, you have Saturn. Well, if you're going to make a space movie in 1902 and you're a bunch of weirdo Jesuits, you're going to put Saturn imagery. Of course you are. For some reason, they seem to be ruled by Saturn, like our friend here that's in the chat each day. Of course you're going to put Saturn personified. Next to Saturn, you have this female representation on the crescent moon. This is the representation of some type of goddess, the name of which I do not recall. But this is a common depiction, this female goddess imagery on the crescent moon. Some of you may know. And then you have these two women holding up a star. When I look at the image of these two women, I don't know why it's two, but it's reminiscent of the goddess Columbia or Columbiana, also depicted in the Statue of Liberty that you find in the United States, New York Harbor. You find this Columbiana. Look no further than the District of Columbia, and the female goddess archetype that's worshipped through these mystery schools. Talcott Clip Collection says Celian, which, yeah, you could say Celian. They run into creatures in a bit, and they're called the Celians. The Celian is the Greek moon goddess and is the depiction of the moon. Celian. You may also be aware of the term selenalian eclipse, which is a certain type of eclipse. So this Celian is the moon goddess in Greek. But again, on the left here, the Columbia depiction. Notice if you ever know the Columbia Pictures, the movie studio, they depict this imagery with the torch. Instead of a torch here, it's a six-pointed star. But this Columbia or Columbiana goddess is often seen as representatives as a female goddess archetype in their mystery schools. So again, notice here in 1902 the imagery that they're presenting in their predictive programming film propaganda. If you think it's just coincidence and it doesn't mean anything, you probably should think again. All right, let's continue. These goddesses then bring some type of, looks to be snow. They create an environment that's inhospitable for these astronauts for whatever reason. So now now that the environment is inhospitable, it drives our astronauts down into the moon, the inner moon. So they enter a crater and they move their way underground. And now they're inside the moon. Now look inside. They showed the outside or the surface of the moon as inhospitable. You may have noticed earlier when they got there, before they went down to rest, there was a crater that exploded. Now they had these moon goddesses creating what was depicted as snow, which could be represented as just cold. Now, our astronauts, after they're driven inside the moon, you find a hospitable environment. There's vegetation, water. You can see the waterfall in the background, rivers and canyons. What are they trying to tell us? What's the prediction here with the predictive programming? Are we now, with our new exploration of the moon here, Artemis, supposed to have astronauts in the moon in 2025. Once they get there, are they going to find something inside the moon? Are they going to find a civilization inside the moon? What are they telling us here? They seem quite happy. They're pointing out all the vegetation. It's hospitable! Now he opens his umbrella. For whatever reason, his umbrella, he plants it into the ground, and the umbrella turns into one of the mushrooms, and then it grows. And they're in awe. They're observing it. To me, that symbolizes human technology, ingenuity. I don't know why they represented it with an umbrella. But we bring our technology to the indigenous environment here inside the moon, and we alter it in some way. The human technology integrates with the biology, and then it becomes augmented, modified, genetically modified in some way. Once our technology is then integrated with the ecosystem, you then see the indigenous people, and they don't like it. Here they are. We have our first alien. In the movie, they call them the Cellans. The Cellans, I believe. Which one of you referenced as the name for the Greek moon goddess. They call them the Selenites here, as the lunar inhabitants. And again, the word is Selene. And Selene, in ancient Greek mythology and religion, is the goddess and personification of the moon. Selene. So now this so-called Selenite, this indigenous native to the moon, he's not happy. Why would he be? You showed up here out of nowhere, and you used your technology, and you modified our ecology. They know it's not good. So he approaches them aggressively. And then one of the astronauts uses the umbrella to basically vaporize him. So now we have our colonizers here of the moon at war with the indigenous people. What are they telling us? Let's continue. All right, so they capture the astronauts and they bring them to the leader. All right, much like the imagery that we saw on Earth with the Jesuit astronomers, I want you to look at the imagery here. So you'll see the king is seated, he's elevated. He has his court, his warriors, but he's surrounded by the luminaries that we saw earlier. The luminaries that greeted our astronomers and were sort of examining them, that were represented as stars. The luminaries are now sitting in council with the king of the Selenites, these moon people. You can see them around there. I also want you to see this imagery here where my cursor is in the top left corner. It's a star surrounded by the sun, and it's also elevated above everything else. So here we have this Helios, the sun god imagery, which you'll also notice is very similar to the Jesuit order symbolism. When you see the Jesuit symbol, you see the same image of the sun, Helios. Notice Helios is elevated here above everything. Helios rules this so-called solar system. Helios is elevated above all, and under Helios is the king of the moon. And again, up here you have the crescent moon imagery here. Notice the old world imagery. Some of us in our community could look at this as what can be considered the engineering, the structures of the Tartars, so-called Tartarian, old world architecture. Some would even say an Antiquitech. So now we're being presented with these indigenous peoples of the moon with this old world architecture that we still see all across this world. Fascinating. Okay, so the leader of the astronauts, the guy who was just the president previously, the chair, he just comes in and he just basically suplexes the king of the Selenites, picks him up, smashes him to the ground, and the guy just vaporizes. So again, therefore completing this conquest, this basically imperialistic conquest of the indigenous moon people. Destroys their leader, and then they escape. And of course, the warriors chase. Again, for whatever reason, the umbrella is being depicted as advanced weaponry. It skipped for some reason. Why did it skip? All right, in this version, it skips a frame, which is weird because the old one I didn't, which kind of sucks. For whatever reason, in this version, it skips. But in the original version, they get back on the capsule and they push it off the edge of one of the cliffs on the moon, and the capsule just falls back to Earth and plunges in the ocean, which is weird they cut that out. But you can find it in one of the other versions. So now the capsule plunges into the sea. We're back on Earth. And now floats back up. And then the capsule is then captured by a ship and then brought back to shore. And you can see the ship and it's pulling the capsule with the astronauts in it. But again, it begs the question, why in 1902 are they depicting the exact mechanism that we used in 1969, which is 67 years later? Why are they depicting the exact mechanism that we use to bring our astronauts back from the moon? Bringing a capsule back into this atmosphere with parachute technology landing it in the ocean, and then retrieving the capsule via a sea vessel. Why in 1902 did they know exactly how we were going to pull off our moon landing and then return? Why in 1865, which is more than 100 years before the so-called Apollo missions to the moon, why was Jules Verne writing this, depicting exactly how we were going to get there and get back? And you'll say to me, oh, Z, well, he depicted it as propulsion technology, explosive projectile through a barrel like a gun. Wasn't it the same thing? Aren't you using propulsion to propel a capsule with astronauts to the moon and then bringing them back using the gravity of the Earth, plunging it down into the ocean and then retrieving the capsule? Why over 100 years prior to the purported and alleged moon mission was Jules Verne basically dictating exactly how it would happen? And then why was it depicted over 60 years prior in this black and white film? Why was science fiction predicting the technology that would become so-called science fact? If you could explain it away, you're just in cognitive dissonance. If you try to convince me that the science fiction writers were just part of the intelligentsia and they just knew what the technology was going to be and they just happened to get it right, you're just evidencing a defense mechanism. You're protecting your paradigm because you're afraid to let go of it. You wouldn't just in science fiction be able to predict the exact science of 100 years into future that would turn out to be the exact mechanism that would get us to the moon and back. You wouldn't be able to do it. And it begs the question why this director predicted this as satire. Was he given an edict from the so-called elites? Hey, Mr. Director, who also was the lead actor in this movie, the president or the chair, the head of the astronomers, and then, you know, the astronauts, the guy with the long beard. He was apparently the writer and director of this movie. You wonder, it begs the question, did he, not going to speculate, was he given an edict? You're going to make a movie about going to space, and you're going to do it based off Jules Verne, H.G. Wells. Apparently, the science fiction writer H.G. Wells, his writings also influenced this movie. And they said, you're going to make a movie and you're going to make it about going to the moon. And he goes, okay, I'll make your movie about going to the moon, goofy. And he made them all clowns. And he made it satirical. And he used hyperbole. And he showed the world, yeah, okay, we're going to go to the moon. In theater, we're going to present a story about going to the moon. We don't really need to get the details right. We just need to present it with enough pageantry and regalia. We're going to have a bunch of ladies scantily dressed clapping to distract you. We're going to have the military come out with trumpets and a parade to distract you. We're going to present a fancy story that tells you how we went to the moon, and you're just going to believe it, even though it's a bunch of clowns. They have to tell you what they're doing before they do it. It's part of their magic. Call it revelation of the method. Call it whatever you want. They have to tell you what they're doing as they're instituting their dark magic spell. It's called natural law. Universal principles that even their magic, and especially their magic, must adhere to. Because once they show it, present it to you right in your face, and you still believe it, you've then consented to their dark magic spell. You need to consent to your enslavement. And now we have basically the mayor of the town. He's a fat cat. Look at his big fat belly. Again, you have the courtiers. You see imagery of celebration. These almost these lollipop-like structures, these candies almost. You'll see a parade come in. So in front of the government, in front of these governmental officials, you have the parade, the music, the band. Again, then you have the same military official greeting them, the same military official that gave the order for the launch. You can't overlook the symbolism here. They parade the capsule, bring in the ladies, and here's our astronauts. And the celebration. The returning heroes. Science. Human ingenuity. The pinnacle of human achievement. We've gone to the moon. We can do anything. Humans can do anything. Juxtapose this imagery with the supposed actual imagery that we saw of Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and that Collins guy after they came back from the moon. Many of you can recall the press conference where it looked like their puppy just got ran over by a car. Not here, though. Celebration. Yes, the fat cat governmental official sanctifies it. We went there and now we will. He's basically adorning them with crowns. Symbolic. They're heroes. And we bring in, apparently, they brought back one of the Selenites. They captured the moon inhabitant and brought it back. What's the symbolism there? And then they dance. Now, I want you guys to pay attention very closely here. The parade goes by. They gather around. They join hands in a circle, almost like you would surround a maypole. And they dance and venerate a statue. But I want you to examine the statue. It's our leader here. It's the president, the wizard, the grand wizard, let's call him. The grand wizard astronomer. I mean, it's a fucking Jesuit, guys. It just... If you don't see that it's basically a wizard Jesuit, I don't know what to tell you. With his robe. Notice what he's doing. He's standing in the position of a conqueror. Right? He has his foot on the head. The head is the moon. You can see it. That's the moon face that we saw. So it's symbolizing that he's conquered the moon. You still see the capsule in the moon's eye. So again, the one eye symbolism with the technology. So we have the Jesuit wizard intelligentsia conquering the moon using technology. But as we're doing it, we're basically desecrating, raping, injuring, and basically maiming the sentient moon. And again, he's got the umbrella in his right hand, which is represented as technology. So we have the so-called scientist who's actually a occultic wizard, supposedly conquering the sentient moon using technology. As the people dance and sing. The other thing I wanted to show you is right here. Let me back it up. I don't think I'm going to be able to zoom in on it, but I was able to previously. Right here, you see where my cursor is? It says science. So under the statue, it's labeled science. They're telling you, you can see this S, the C, the I, and ENCE. The science is surrounded by the, you see this imagery here? It's obviously science. It's surrounded by this classic imagery of the you would see depicted in the Greek mythology as the laurel. These are laurels. All right. They're venerating so-called science and depicting it as a wizard as they celebrate with grand pageantry. They're telling you that so-called science is nothing more than a magic spell. It's an illusion. It's a trick. It's not actual science. It's science in name only. It's science personified, co-opted. They're telling you it's a spell. It's not real. There's your trip to the moon, everybody.